Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's lecture. So whether you are here in the class or joining us online, I'm very glad you're part of the discussion. So let's jump right in and explore the key idea that I'll be covering today. So the topic for today is, can hope be learned? And it is a personal presentation. I use my own background to illustrate this question. So I'd like you to think about this question, can hope be learned, as I move through my lecture. So I'm going to talk about my parents, Adolf and Steffa Weissmark. Both of them survived Auschwitz. And I'll talk about symbols of dehumanization, coping in despair, choosing hope, what I call grounded hope, the power of hope, and the legacy of survival. And then we'll end with some discussion groups questions that you'll take to your groups using AI to actually help us answer some of these questions. So both my parents, Adolf and Steffa Weissmark, were survivors of the Holocaust, um, death camps, specifically Auschwitz. And every member of my family, my parents' family, besides a few cousins, was killed by the Nazis. So my parents were the only survivors of a very large extended family. They were about 19 and 15 when they were taken to the camps. As a young girl, and that's my mother, myself, I couldn't really make sense of how my mother survived. And I think lots of curious children, as they get older, may wonder about that. I knew she came from a very wealthy background. And I knew in the camps later on, when I was much older, she would talk to me about it. As a young child, she actually never talked to me about it. And I grew up, had a really happy childhood. It was only when I was later that I became curious. Around 13, I started asking her and pressed her for more details. How did she actually survive? And my mother explained that when the prisoners first arrived at Auschwitz, they were selected for either the gas chamber or forced labor, and they were stripped of all their belongings. They were shaved, they were lined up and received tattoos. And so immediately they were made into non people, so to speak. They were dehumanized. My mother's number, and that's how I became curious about the concentration camps, was tattooed on her arm. Her number was 47021. And she used to tell me when I first asked, oh, it was her phone number, because again, she didn't want to burden me with the past. It was only as I got older that she would more freely talk about it. She told me that the number was a label that the German Nazis would use at every roll call. So every morning, the German Nazis would come and call out a number. And initially, the numbers were sewn on the prisoners' clothes. But the death rate became so high, my mother said, that the Nazis started tattooing them on the prisoners' bodies so they could keep track of the corpses. My mother considered her number and I'm quoting her, a lucky number. I didn't quite understand why she would see this as lucky. And then she told me this story that one day a Nazi guard forgot to call my mother's number to be gassed in the crematorium. So apparently it was called the day before, but on the day that everyone was told to go to the crematorium, they forgot to call her number. And she knew that other prisoners knew that she was on the list. And usually when you were on the list, you just went. And if not, people would actually report you. But she decided to take a risk. She didn't get in line. And she said to me, this never happened before where they lost the list of members. And she said she was so lucky because that was one situation where they lost her number and she survived. And she also said she was lucky because in the camp, she had the job of sorting people's shoes as they arrived by train to Auschwitz. And that enabled her to trade the shoes for food. My mother said she always tried to impart lessons when she talked about the camps. It wasn't to spook me, so to speak, but it was really to impart some lesson. And so one of her first lessons was she wanted to point out when there's nothing to lose, take a risk. And that's why she didn't show up on the line because she decided to take a risk and not show up on the line to the crematorium. And she said, I was young, I wanted to live. But, and this is the point of today's lecture, she really emphasized that if you did not have hope in the camps, no matter what, not luck or anything else, would help you. And she told me that many prisoners, given the circumstances, just gave up. I mean, out of desperation, hunger, the conditions. And there were nicknames used in the camp. I don't know exactly how this nickname came about. I'm sure someone can look it up and find out. But the people who gave up, my mother said, they used to call them Musulman. And some of them, she said, would run into the wire. That meant they would commit suicide. She also said you could always identify the people in the camp who gave up hope because they would sort of just shuffle around. They had this very forlorn look. And they had no chance of survival, my mother pointed out, when they gave up hope. And other prisoners, including my mother, would avoid all contact with them, as if when you gave up hope, it was contagious. The Nazis, my mother told me, considered the Muslim men undesirable. And if they spotted someone sort of shuffling along with this look of having given up, they were immediately sentenced to death. This is a quote my mother said, and it was actually a videotape when she was talking about her experiences. She said, I made myself a promise that I would not give up hope. And she said to me, she made this promise to herself in the camp. She said, I imagined that one day I would be released from the camp and I would tell the world what happened so that no one would ever suffer again like we suffered, so that the world would be more peaceful. So this is something she consciously decided. Hope is sometimes misunderstood in the psychology literature as evidence of uncertainty. For example, we may say, gee, I hope tomorrow will be a nice, warm, sunny day. Or I hope so-and-so will come visit me. In other words, we're not sure, but we use the word hope as to say, well, I hope that happens. Conversely, sometimes hope is not synonymous with optimism. We use it differently. You can be not, necessarily optimistic, but still say, well, I have hope. But my mother used the word hope very differently, and this is what interested me and still interests me. She was very aware of the survival rates in Auschwitz, and she knew her chances of surviving were slim, so she wasn't fooling herself. She knew about the horrible reality. It wasn't a false hope. The hope for a better future, which my mother always kind of maintained throughout her life, is, I think, a rational motivation. Because if we do not have hope, the wish to benefit the common good, we would never be inspired. The human heart would never be inspired to improve things. So my mother's hope expressed both her commitment to a better future and her belief in its possibility. And I call that grounded hope because she wasn't denying the reality, yet she still thought the future could be better than now. So grounded hope encourages us to cope with a traumatic experience like concentration camp instead of succumbing to despair. Lessons from past resilience can help us cope with the present adversity. And, it's interesting. I started writing an article about hope during the pandemic because there was so much focus, as I'm sure many of you remember, obviously, on our physical well-being, but equally important, as some of you may remember, were the mental challenges. There was a great deal of loss and isolation. And during the pandemic, it took an enormous psychological and emotional toll on people globally. I looked a little bit at the US data, and it showed that the psychological, emotional consequences of the pandemic were, in fact, quite devastating. to sum up this data for you, about 1 in 3 Americans using this data and also the Mental Health America data reported being either anxious or depressed or, really struggling, shall we say. I encourage you to look at the data. The Mental Health America data is, pretty reliable, but still it is. I'm just pointing this out. Obviously, it wasn't a random sample. It was a self-selection. But I think it's safe to say many of us who went through the pandemic remember it was a challenging time. And definitely, I think I was very aware, and I'm sure many of you were, people kind of were challenged by the circumstances. And it created what were called at the time a mental health tsunami. That was actually a term that the government used to talk about the mental health needs of US citizens. And the US Surgeon General recently talked about today addressing the youth mental health crisis. Today, it's gotten a little bit better. I recently looked it up. It's about 1 in 5 people report. So it went from about 1 in 3 to 1 in 5 mental health struggles in the US. So given this magnitude of our mental health issues, a better understanding of hope maybe, this is actually a question, may help us as a collective strategy for managing our mental health. Now, I point out here the positive benefits of hope, but I want you later in your breakout rooms to be much more discerning and look at the research and see if, in fact, this is, correct. I don't want to cherry pick the data, and that's part of what I teach throughout the course, right? That we should think for ourselves. We should not trust the data on any topic. But for the purposes of this lecture, I did want to just highlight there has been research to suggest that hope is a resiliency factor, and it can help promote well-being during a global health crisis. But it could even be a protective factor, some of the research shows, against developing symptoms of PTSD. That is, people who are higher in hope are more likely to be able to overcome chronic or severe symptoms of PTSD. They're more likely, the research suggests, people who are high in hope, to make skillful changes to life's challenges and to use more effective coping strategies in the face of setbacks. So there is some data to suggest that it is useful. Furthermore, some other data suggests that hope actually stimulates our positive affect. We are more content. We have a greater degree of life satisfaction and success, especially when we're stressed. Hope may protect against states of helplessness, which we know is linked to depression. Individuals who are depressed talk about high rates, they feel out of control, and they feel that life is uncertain, whereas hope can protect against those states because it gives us the sense that we can predict, control, and maybe get results that we are desiring. And hope is associated with resilience to the chronic stresses associated with the COVID-19 pandemic and other life difficulties. So my mother definitely inspired me to follow in her footsteps along a path of what I would call sharing hope. She hoped for progress toward a better and a more just and peaceful world. So even when she got out of camp and many, many years later, she really believed, and of course there were many conflicts around the world throughout her lifetime, she always believed that we could do better in the world and that it was possible to hope for a more peaceful coexistence. And she felt strongly wanting to get the word out that no one should ever suffer to the extent that people suffered in concentration camps. And she definitely believed and hoped in that possibility that humankind would learn. Now, given the state of the world today, it may be hard to hold on to hope, but I know if she was still alive, she would, because she believed in the possibility Not that it necessarily would happen right away, but she believed in the possibility of a higher good. And she felt this was a rational motivation because without it, to benefit the common good would never have inspired the human heart. In other words, she felt you have to have hope to imagine a better future. So again, I started with, the question, this lecture, can hope be learned? And it's something you answer for yourselves. Part of my course is to teach you how to think for yourself. I don't have answers for you. I have questions for you. And to use science and data to help you think more clearly, to use empirical evidence. So using AI, I'd like you in your breakout groups with your team members to look at the empirical evidence. As I said, I presented some showing the positive impact of having hope, but I want you to look more carefully. Take a look at all the evidence that's out there. Take a look at some meta-analytic studies. Does hope indeed improve psychological or physical health outcomes? What studies support the positive effects of hope? But equally important, are there studies suggesting the limits or the negative consequences? And how credible and recent are the sources your AI tool provides? So that's really important as we use AI tools. I gave a lecture on this a few weeks ago. AI sometimes seems much more credible than the data is. So it often gives you incorrect citations, incorrect data. So you really need to use your own thinking here. I hope these questions are of interest to everyone. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for your attention today. I appreciate you all attending the lecture. And I really hope this idea about hope can give you new ways to think about the topic and apply it in your own life and in your own work. So until next time, thank you so much. And please keep exploring this question on your own. Thank you.